The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons and salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I described Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world."
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're broadcasting live this week from KWAI 1080 AM in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit called Vocal, VOQAL.org is their website. And they have and typically our twice-a-year board meetings are in Denver or Chicago, where everybody can get to. And this year they decided to move it to Honolulu for a little fun, I guess. I'm not paid for doing that, so this is kind of a nice benefit, I suppose. And so it's all next weekend, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. I'm in with this board meeting. And so Louise and I decided to come out a little early and do the show from one of our newest affiliates. And special thanks to Barry Wagenvort, who is the station owner and has been our host and gave us a guided tour around Honolulu yesterday. It was just fascinating. So we're having a good time. There's a lot in the news today. We will be getting to that as we continue through the program. And tomorrow, by the way, is the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we're going to have I believe we're going to have a special guest on for quite some time during the show tomorrow, maybe even a full hour on that. So, but right now, Charles Sauer is on the line with us. He is the libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. He has a new book out called Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. His website is marketinstitute.org, and you can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Oh, it's always great talking with you, Charles. So Sinclair Broadcasting now owns 270 some odd television stations. They're trying to jack that up to close to 300. And now the news is out about this bizarre hostage video that they did. Meanwhile, we're seeing, I'm just looking at this morning's deal book email from the New York Times. In offering to buy Sky News outright, Walt Disney is hoping to finally win regulatory approval for Fox's bid to buy 61% of Sky that it doesn't already own. Fox itself has proposed making Sky News fully separate. The bottom line, Disney wants Fox to have full control of Sky to support its $52 billion effort to buy most of Fox, and it wants to get ahead of Comcast. So Comcast and Disney are competing for who gets to buy Sky and maybe a large chunk of Fox, and it's like, it sure seems to me, Charles, competition seems dead. You walk through American cities and you don't see local businesses anymore. Actually, there's quite a few of them here in Honolulu, but I think that they must have some pretty strict regulations. Our host was telling me yesterday that none of the big national banks are here either. So, but it seems like everywhere else in the United States, we have entered the cancer stage of capitalism. Your thoughts on how we avoid this? What do we do when basically, small and medium-sized businesses simply can no longer exist?
Yeah, well, we need to remove the rules and regulations that were put there by the cronies to stop the competition, right? So, I mean,
For example,
we've talked about it on the show before, but John D. Rockefeller, when he was, running his oil business, he was lobbying for rules and for regulations that hurt competitors and that he could comply with. Or if we're talking about Facebook, who's in the news right now, the odds are is that some sort of privacy regulation will come out of Congress in the end, and it's something that Facebook itself can easily adapt to, but the next Facebook is going to have a problem competing. I mean, I think there was a book in the 70s on this, The Triumph of Conservatism. This is the exact same argument. Again, business leaders come in, get regulations in place, and the left cheers it, but the fact is that it hurts competitors in the future.
Well, nice speech, Charles, but I don't know what you're talking about. What regulation is it that allows Walmart to come into a town and wipe out the local competition with below market pricing in the first year or two? What regulation is it that allows these massive mergers that used to be forbidden by the Sherman Antitrust Act? What am I missing here? I thought this was all just because Reagan in '83 stopped enforcing the Sherman Act.
The Sherman Act is a problem in and of itself. But if you look at what Walmart has to do to come into a city, I mean, as you said, you don't see them in Honolulu, or in Hawaii. The problem for the people there.
Actually, there is a Walmart here. I think.
Well, if there wasn't one, if there's not the other big boxes there, which you say there isn't, it makes cost of living more expensive for the people on the island. I mean, that's a problem. But when Walmart comes into a city, they have to jump through hoop after hoop because of different zoning laws, because of hoops that, communities have put in place. And that makes it, it's something that Walmart can navigate. Well, no, the here is, you don't have to feel sorry for Walmart. The fact is that they can navigate it. The problem is that the next Walmart, the person who's going to run a business, the Thom Hartmann megastore, it's the one that has all of the fair trade goods. It has all of the products you want. It's impossible for you to get the big box store in that neighborhood.
Well, I'm not trying to get a big box store. I'm trying to run a local business in this thought experiment here. And I still don't know what regulation you are talking about, Charles.
Well, I just mentioned
unless
the
you're just,
zoning one. If we go
anti-regulation.
Back to John D. Rockefeller,
you're opposed to zoning laws? Really?
Yeah, zoning laws are. You asked for one for me to mention one. The zoning laws are something that hold back small competitors. We can look at intellectual property laws and see the.
Wait a minute. How does zoning law? I mean, zoning laws are where communities say we want a certain standard of quality here. If you're gonna build your Walmart, you have to at least put sidewalks in. The traffic has to be organized in a way that isn't a mess. I mean, it's really pretty remarkable if you visit a city. For example, Portland, Oregon is I think one of the most regulated cities in America, and outside of the bridge, the I-5 bridge, which they tried to expand a couple of years ago, and a local right-wing crazy host basically got everybody to shoot it down. But outside of that, it's pretty reasonable. I mean, they've organized the streets and organized one-ways and whatnot in such a way that you can get around, you can find parking, there's parks, it's got more green than any other city in America. The quality of life is really great. On the other hand, you go up to Anchorage, Alaska, which has very few zoning laws. Maybe they're getting some now, but the last time I was there was about 6 years ago, you know, it's that you've got subdivisions with no sidewalks. Kids can't safely, you know, live or walk on the streets or in the streets. Actually, it's their only option. You've got, you know, just a hodgepodge of stuff. It's a mess. And you know, yeah, it supports rapid growth, but it just devastates the quality of life.
Well, so
what's wrong with zoning laws? We have a minute, by the way, Charles.
As opposed to innovation, you know, you support a clean sidewalk or something. I think that this is just a trade-off that communities need to
no, you know, you can have innovation and sidewalks, Charles.
No, you can't. Well, you're going to have less.
If you're going to play the game of business, you just play by the damn rules. Come on.
The more hurdles that you put in front of a small business, the harder it is for them to get traction. I mean, look.
Small businesses are not buying an entire city block and having to put sidewalks in.
Look, we can go.
You know, this canard of, oh, we're all in favor of the small business. You know, I'm trying to get the small business to survive in America. I don't see them anymore. I'm seeing them wiped out because Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act.
Yeah, come on. We can go back to another darling of the left, LBJ, and see what he did with media and the radio stations and how he hurt small businesses by using regulations to keep other stations out of the markets that he wanted in.
Radio stations seemed to work really well in the 60s and 70s. It was in the 80s. But, well, anyhow, we're hitting the break. Charles Sauer. Charles, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Charles's new book, Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do, just came out. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R, and marketinstitute.org is his website. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're back, right? Yep. Okay. Welcome back. Let's see here. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I'm calling about currently there's a new tax bill that the GOP is trying to push through, and I'm just asking, could you give me some information about what this new tax bill is going to be like? Right.
My understanding is, Jared, that the GOP tax scam that they passed a few months ago, or a month ago or whatever, basically said that the tax breaks for big corporations are permanent. They're going to last forever. But the tax breaks for individuals, which includes the billionaires, those tax breaks, which don't mean much to the average person. You might see an extra $2 in your paycheck. In fact, Paul Ryan tweeted about a woman who saw an extra $1.50 in her paycheck. But if you're a billionaire oligarch, then it's a huge tax break for you. Those tax breaks were set to expire in 8 years, and they had to do that to keep the price of the thing down below $5 trillion. Now they want to. Now the billionaires are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we don't want our taxes to go back up again in 8 years." And so, here's $500,000, Paul Ryan. Please extend our tax breaks forever. And extending their tax breaks forever over the next 10 years will cost about $1 trillion. So they're talking about a $1 trillion, brand new addition or modification of the tax bill. Plus, there was a whole bunch of little unintended consequence things in the tax bill that they want to fix. But they're going to use those as the excuse to extend the billionaires' tax breaks. Make sense, Jared?
Yes, it does. So that would apply to only the billionaires and not people making under a certain amount of money?
No, it would apply to everybody, but if you're making less than $50,000 a year, the GOP tax scam is probably giving you something in the order of $30 or $40 a year.
Oh yeah.
If you're making $500,000 a year, you probably got a $20,000 tax break or thereabouts. If you're making billions, your tax break could be in the millions or more, frankly, depending on how you make your money, because they changed the rules on pass-through companies so that billionaires who own pass-through companies, like much of Koch Industries, can now just pay a 25% tax rate rather than the old 39% tax rate. So there's some huge benefits in there for very, very very morbidly rich people. This is a phrase I like to use.
And it doesn't even take into, the co-ops that are rising. I mean, they've been sabotaging Obamacare. I mean, you have people who are, making, $7, $8, $9 an hour. They haven't seen their wages increase since like the 1960s. It's this, tax scam. It hasn't, trickled down to me. I haven't noticed anything at all. And I do not make that much money. I am the working class for the most part, and I just wonder if how are they going to pass this through the Senate? Because I think they need 60 votes.
I think they'll do it very quietly, frankly, if they can pull it off, and they're going to try and do it before the election. Or maybe they'll wait until Christmas, right after the election, and if they've lost the House or the Senate, then they'll do it very, very quickly. We'll see. But you're right, Jared, we need to keep an eagle eye out on this thing. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Well, as I said, there's a lot going on actually in the next hour. I want to get into this whole political corruption thing, but I wrote a piece for Alternet about it, and pointing out that David Hogg has called for town halls on April 7th, which is just a great thing. It's just a marvelous thing, and I hope that you're calling your members of Congress and demanding that they hold a town hall on April 7th, and just more broadly, some sort of reasonable gun regulations. And my take on this, the whole thing, and you can read this article over at alternet.org. It's titled "Political Corruption is Underwriting America's Gun Control Nightmare." And then the subhead that Alternet wrote, they said, let's get the money out of politics, then we can deal with the NRA. Actually, what I'm saying is, let's get the money out of politics and deal with the NRA. I think we can do both at the same time. And he basically, what David Hogg did is he said to John McCain, after he had asked Marco Rubio why he took $3 million from the NRA, he said to John McCain, why'd you take $7 million from the NRA? And, and I note in the article, McCain's answer would no doubt be, well, they support me because they like my positions. I didn't change my positions just to get their money, which is essentially what Marco Rubio said when they told the Parkland kids when he was confronted with a similar question in a CNN town hall. And it's a BS answer, as we all know. I mean, we have this on-again, off-again relationship with political corruption in the United States that probably hit its high point outside of today. I'd say right now, political corruption, in terms of the number of dollars being spent and the way that the government is being modified in order to benefit those who are very wealthy and who are buying politicians, I would say that it is worse now than it has ever been in this country. And I'm a reasonably good student of the economic and political history of this country. Now, the worst outside of today was in the late 1800s, the period from the 1870s to 1900, basically, 1910. And it was referred to as the Gilded Age. And the gilded, of course, means gold-covered or gold-colored. And Donald Trump is so in love with the Gilded Age that he has replaced the blue curtains, in the Oval Office with gold ones. He's got gold-plated chairs in the West Wing. I mean, it's bizarre. He's trying to get back, and that was, you know, a pretty grim era for everybody except the oligarchs. That's when John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and Mr. Mellon and all these guys became, you know, what in today's dollars would be worth billions. And there was one particular politician who really highlights all this. This was in the late part of the 1800s. His name was William Clark. And William Clark died in 1925, and when he died, he had a fortune that was worth, in today's dollars, about $4 billion. Back then, I think it was 200 or 300 million. But you know, in terms of purchasing power, it'd be $4 billion. And in 1899, William Clark, he was the copper king in Montana. He lived in a big mansion in Montana. He had, you know, hard scrabble, clawed his way up to basically owning, you know, the copper mines and whatnot, and got insanely rich, because this was during the period of time when electricity was happening. And so all this copper wire that was being laid for telegraph lines and for electric lighting in the cities, it all required copper, and he owned the biggest supply of copper in America. So he wanted to be a senator, a United States senator. And back then, senators were appointed by members of the Senate in the various states. Actually, every state could do it however they wanted under the Constitution. Most of them just had their senators appoint somebody. That was the case in Oklahoma. And so William Clark went to these senators, and he owned virtually all of them, with one rather notable exception. And that was a guy by the name of State Senator Fred Whiteside, who was Clark's opponent in the Senate. But so Clark went to the senators and said, "Hey, you know, elect me as the United States senator, the state senators." And they did. And the story that was told was that he stood outside the Senate chamber with a pocket full in his coat, an inside pocket full of white envelopes that had $1,000 bills in them. And as the guys came out from the vote, he handed out the $1,000 bills. Well, State Senator Fred Whiteside blew the whistle on this, and when Clark got to the United States Senate in Washington, D.C., they refused to seat him. I mean, they were all in favor of corruption. They just didn't like it to be so visible. And so he, you know, for that whole year they wouldn't seat him. And so he went back, and the governor, who he owned, appointed him for the next term, and he served a full 6-year term. And I've got an 8-year term in the article. I need to fix that. But in any case, that was pretty bad, right? And that led to, in 1912, William Howard Taft, the progressive Republican, that led to Teddy Roosevelt campaigning for a constitutional amendment for direct election of the senators by the people rather than the state legislatures appointing them, number one. And number two, it led to the Tillman Act, which was a law passed in 1912 that said that it was illegal for anybody for any corporation in America to give money to any political candidate. And that, of course, was struck down in 1976 by the Buckley Act. So anyhow, that's where we're at.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The Supreme Court has really set up today's, this era's political corruption. It's nuts. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Johann Hari's brand new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So he starts out talking about how he had been on antidepressants for most of his life, from his teenage years into his 30s. And then he says, "Then when I was 31 years old, I found myself chemically naked for the first time in my adult life. For almost a decade, I had been ignoring my therapist's gentle reminders that I was still depressed despite my drugs. It was only after a crisis in my life, when I felt unequivocally terrible and couldn't shake it off, that I decided to listen to him. What I had been trying for so long wasn't, it seemed, working. And so when I flushed away my final packs of Paxil, I found these mysteries waiting for me, like children on a train platform waiting to be collected, trying to catch my eye. Why was I still depressed? Why were there so many people like me? And I realized there was a third mystery hanging over all of it. Could something other than bad brain chemistry have been causing depression and anxiety in me and in so many people all around me? If so, what could it be? Still, I put off looking into it. Once you settle into a story about your pain, you're extremely reluctant to challenge it. It was like a leash I had put on my distress to keep it under control. I feared that if I messed with the story I'd lived with for so long, the pain would be like an unchained animal and would savage me. Over a period of several years, I fell into a pattern. I would begin to research these mysteries by reading scientific papers and talking to some of the scientists who wrote them. But I always backed away because what they said made me feel disoriented and more anxious than I had been at the start. I focused on the work for another book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs instead. It sounds ridiculous to say I found it easier to interview hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels than to look into what causes depression and anxiety. But messing with my story about my emotions, what I felt and why I felt it, seemed more dangerous to me than that. And then finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. So over a period of 3 years, I went on a journey of over 40,000 miles. I conducted more than 200 interviews across the world with some of the most important social scientists in the world, with people who had been through the depths of depression and anxiety, and with people who had recovered. I ended up in all sorts of places I couldn't have guessed at in the beginning. An Amish village in Indiana, a Berlin housing project rising up in rebellion, a Brazilian city that had banned advertising, a Baltimore laboratory taking people back through their traumas in a totally unexpected way. What I learned forced me to radically revise my story about myself, my story about the distress spreading like tar over our culture. I want to flag up right at the start 2 things that shape the language I'm going to use through all of this book. I'm reading from the introduction. Both were surprising to me. I was told by my doctor that I was suffering from both depression and acute anxiety. I had believed those were separate problems, and that is how they were discussed for the 13 years I received medical care for them. But I noticed something odd as I did my research. Everything that causes an increase in depression also causes an increase in anxiety, and the other way around. They rise and fall together. It seemed curious, and I began to understand it only when, in Canada, I sat down with Robert Kohlenberg, a professor of psychology. He too once thought that depression and anxiety were different things. But as he studied it for over 20 years now, he discovered, he says, that the data are indicating that they're not distinct. In practice, quote, the diagnoses, particularly depression and anxiety, overlap, end quote. Sometimes one part is more pronounced than the other. You might have panic attacks this month and be crying a lot next month. But the idea that they're separate in the way that, say, having pneumonia and having a broken leg are separate is not borne out by the evidence. Robert's side of the argument has been prevailing in the scientific debate recently. In the past few years, the National Institutes of Health, the main body funding medical research in the United States, has stopped funding studies that present depression and anxiety as different diagnoses. They want something more realistic that corresponds to the way people are in actual clinical practice, he explains. I started to see depression and anxiety as like cover versions of the same song by different bands. Depression is a cover version by a downbeat emo band, and anxiety is a cover version by a screaming heavy metal group. But the underlying sheet music is the same. They're not identical, but they're twinned. The second insight comes from something else I learned as I studied these 9 causes of depression and anxiety that he writes about in this book. Whenever I wrote about depression and anxiety in the past, I started by explaining one thing. I am not talking about unhappiness. Unhappiness and depression are totally different things. There's nothing more infuriating to a depressed person than to be told to cheer up or to be offered jolly little solutions as if they were merely having a bad week. It feels like being told to cheer up yourself by going out dancing after you've broken both your legs. But as I studied the evidence, I noticed something that I couldn't ignore. The forces that are making us depressed and severely anxious are, at the same time, making even more people unhappy. It turns out that there is a continuum between unhappiness and depression. They're still very different in the same way that losing a finger in a car accident is different from losing an arm, and falling over the street is different from falling over the cliff. But they are connected. The book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from KWAI, AM 1080 in Honolulu, Hawaii. And we're very grateful to the station for providing us with a studio and a place to broadcast from, and to Barry Wagenvort for his kind help and everything else. It's just great. So let's pick up some phone calls here. Rita in Kailua, Kona, Hawaii. Am I saying that right, Rita?
Yes, you are, on the Big Island.
Hey. Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi. So you wanted to talk about big box stores?
Yeah, and I want to talk about Charles Sauer. I usually mute him when he comes on. I can't stand this. When you say something is black, he says it's white. When you say it's green, he says it's gray. You know, he just wants to buck you, and it makes me very nervous. And that's how I started out my day, by turning you on, as I usually do, 6 a.m. here. And I just can't take that kind of. I know you like to have people on that have adversarial ideas, but he goes over the top for me. Now, I want to tell you that the minder, or whoever who took you on this tour in Honolulu, obviously did not prefer to take you past there into the malls where the big box stores are. There's many.
Oh, they are here?
Oh,
okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah. There's a lot of small businesses in downtown, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they're catering to the tourists, and most of them are out within a short amount of time, like a couple of years, and then they bring in another jewelry store or another whatever to cater to the tourists, you know, surf shop, whatever. So I live on the Big Island, known as the Hawaii Island, and last I heard, the population is 160,000, might be more than that. But I, for 30 years, watched big box stores move in, and mom and pop stores die on the vine. A good example is Home Depot and Lowe's moved in here, and they put out our local lumber stores. And I could go on and on. I only know of one ladies' dress shop. It's been here since I've been here and longer. And that one has survived. That lady has another one down in another shopping center that survived. But for the most part, we have Costco. We have, I think Kmart was the first to come in about 30 years ago. And then Walmart came in. And yes, it's this. I'm
curious about the banks, because the banks is what I heard yesterday. Are the big national banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, those, you know, are they there on the Big Island?
Well, we did go to a Wells Fargo office when we tried to get a mortgage some years ago, and we returned to it later. But no, it's not a bank. It seems to be just an outlet for trying to suck up people who need mortgages. No, we deal with the Bank of Hawaii, which goes as far as Guam. It stays within the Hawaiian Islands, and they don't sell their mortgages. And so, because I don't come to Honolulu, except for medical at Kaiser Permanente, I can't say what I don't know enough about the big banks, so I'll go with what your minder or tour guide told you on that issue.
Oh, it's neither. It's our friend Barry, who's the station owner here.
Okay, he could probably give. Yeah, I'm sure he's absolutely right about big banks.
He's lived here for a couple of decades.
Sure, we go with the Bank of Hawaii because, like I say, I wouldn't go with a mainland bank. We need to be with somebody that it's local. I don't know if it's kind of like the Bank of Nebraska or what. You know, where North.
Well, that's the thing. There aren't I think North Dakota has well, I know North Dakota has a state bank. I didn't know that Hawaii did. I'm guessing it's probably a for-profit bank, but I'm going to have to do a little research on this. Rita, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to us here at 6 o'clock in the morning in Hawaii. It's very nice to hear from you. Thank you. Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today? Bob? No, Bob. Okay, we'll put Bob on hold here. He's on line 7. And try John in Claremore, Oklahoma. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom. One of the side benefits of listening to your program is it sometimes reduces my blood pressure, and for that, I thank you.
Okay.
I thought the best way that the David Hogg, Laura Ingraham thing could have been handled would have been to allow David Hogg, 17-year-old pipsqueak, to go on the Laura Ingraham show and respond to her and her audience in person. Would fairness in broadcasting have allowed that?
You know, it's hard to say. The whole, if you're talking about the law that Reagan nuked, you know, back in the 70s, back in 78 or 87, excuse me. I'm not sure what basically what that.
West, by the way.
Yeah, the Fairness Doctrine. What the Fairness Doctrine required was that multiple points of view be presented, but only when it was the station itself talking. So if a radio station back in the era of the Fairness Doctrine, if a radio station carried Laura Ingraham, and of course nobody did back then, but there were plenty of very political shows. In fact, the biggest one in America was Alan Berg's show, and you know, throughout the 70s and the early 80s, and he was assassinated during, I think it was in the 80s, by 2 skinhead Nazis. He was broadcasting out of Denver, and his show went into 20 some odd states in the Midwest and the West, and he was a lefty. I mean, he was the Rush Limbaugh of the country at the time, and they just killed him. But because he did not own the station, he did not have to have dissenting voices on his show under the Fairness Doctrine. But back then, stations used to do editorials. And in fact, when I was working at WITL, the station did editorials, and we used to, you know, have to come up with, you know, well, what's going to be the pushback? Who's going to answer the editorial? And so if a station, and TV stations did editorials, and of course Sinclair is doing that right now, with no balanced opinion because the Fairness Doctrine is dead. But had the Fairness Doctrine been around, it would, you know, the Sinclair would have to put somebody on responding to them because that's coming from the corporate headquarters itself. But if it was a show that they just happened to carry, or, you know, a syndicated show or whatever, it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't then, and it certainly isn't now. Answer your question, John?
Yes, except I wish we had more ways to respond to some of these things. But anyway, I do appreciate.
Well, I think the big thing is, yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate your call. I think the big thing, frankly, is media consolidation, and you're looking at we saw this in radio with, and this all, by the way, came out of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which was passed by mostly Republicans, and I believe, and signed by Bill Clinton. But the Telecommunications Act basically did away with the ownership rules. It used to be you couldn't, or wildly modified them. You couldn't own both a radio station and a television station and a newspaper in a town, because basically your voice would dominate that town. And you know, that got changed in '96 with the Telecommunications Act. And there's an article on Alternet right now specifically about that very topic. Daryl in Mountain Center, California. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind?
Oh my gosh, what a privilege it is to talk to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Daryl.
Last week, or two weekends ago, actually, when the March for Our Lives, I think it was like 2 days later, you made a comment or made a little talk on your show, and I think it bears repeating weekly, if not at least monthly, about how the restrictions on health clinics should be applied to gun stores and gun shows. you
There
remember
was the
that?
restrictions on abortion clinics. Yes.
Yes.
If you had to get, in order to get a gun, you had to go jump through all the hoops that a woman has to jump through in many states to get an abortion. You had to see pictures of the victims. You had to wait 48 hours in a distant town. There was only one place, one gun store in the entire state. If those rules were in place, those rules that the right-wingers have applied to women wanting to get abortions, if those same rules were applied to mostly men, but people, let's say, wanting to buy a gun, I suspect that there would be a hell of a lot fewer guns in this country.
I agree. That's the most sensible, common sense rule that I've heard, and I want to thank you for that, along with everything else you've said over the years. I've listened to you since Birdie days, you know. So.
Well, thank you, Daryl.
Okay. Have a good day, Tom.
Thank you very much for the call. Yep, good talking with you. Thank you. William in Marijuana, Louisiana. I'm sure I'm mangling the name of your town, William.
Oh, Tom, we got it. I'm on the bayou in Louisiana. I went to the march to the Capitol about gun violence in Baton Rouge. You would not believe the local news reported hundreds, but there's difference in 100 and 1,500. You know, we had at least 1,500 because it was from the middle of town center in Baton Rouge to the state capitol, and we filled up the grass. Anyway, I called my Louisiana rep and I told him, why would you arm teachers? Because when I was in school, the coach was molesting a girl. Now, could you imagine if he had a gun for years?
Wow. Yeah, well, we need to stop both of those things. I mean, but William, thank you for the call. And thanks for the heads up. That's interesting that 1,500 people showed up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for gun control, and the media said, well, it's a few hundred people. That's fascinating. William, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from KWAI in Honolulu, Hawaii.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind?
Long time. I was suffering in Kentucky for the month and absent, and here you are in Hawaii, you devil. Terrific. I'll trade
it's
you
tough work, but somebody's got to do it, right?
Oh, Lord. Your screener thought this might be of interest. I was not 100% sure what your subjects are. He said they're sort of multiple today. This is a quote. You may have read it in the New York Times today. I about dropped a laptop if it had been in my lap. This is a quote from Maria Elena Colindres Ortega, who was a member of the Honduran Congress, no less, who is now part of the great caravan. I say great because I'm very pro what's happening. Caravan crossing through Mexico to the U.S. border, which you know about. This is her quote. I think you will, quote unquote, appreciate this in a not very happy way, but she said, we Hondurans had to live through a fraudulent electoral process. We have suffered a progressive militarization of our society, and they are criminalizing those who protest as well as crumbling our classical institutions as we stand. Does that sound at all familiar to you?
Yeah, it sounds like what's happening here.
Right? It just seems, I mean, it's just hard to believe
this
that
trend is circling the globe, Nicholas.
Yeah,
I mean, look at Orban in Hungary, look at Erdogan in Turkey.
Yeah.
It's literally circling the globe, and it has been growing in America since the 80s, but it really took a big step forward with Bush, and now again with Trump, same thing.
With Trump, yeah.
The whole.
It seems we have we helped to elect to elect this most recent Honduran quote unquote president, who's no more legitimate than Trump, I'm certain. And this ex-congresswoman.
Well, there was an election The results were announced today. That wasn't Honduras, though. That was Costa Rica. No, it wasn't Costa Rica. What country was it?
Costa Rica was yesterday, I think.
Oh, was it? It was the one where the two guys with the same last name, but they weren't related, and one of them was a conservative and the other was a liberal, and the issue became gay marriage.
Yeah,
that was
right.
Yeah, okay. I heard that. I heard that on BBC this morning, and I thought, well, that's good. You know, it's because that was supposed to be a neck-and-neck race.
Right.
So, but Costa Rica is a pretty progressive society. I mean, they're the only country in the world or in this hemisphere without a military. For example, if I'm remembering
And they've
correctly.
gone completely green, and it seemed incredible that would be a neck-and-neck race, and evangelical as well, of course. The conservative.
Yeah. So
I think we've exported enough around the world. I think we need a timeout. Let the rest of the world go its merry way without the United States influence.
Well, Nicholas, you're in Mexico. We've got about 20 seconds. What's the political climate like there?
Well, if I can get his name right, AMLO. He goes by AMLO. It's Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador is slated to win, and he is a virulent liberal lefty. So, of course, we're all worried for his life at this point, because before, we know in elections past, people have just been disappeared. And but we're praying if the election is legitimate, AMLO will win, and then the U.S. is in big trouble with Mexico.
That should be fascinating. When is the election, Nicholas?
Oh, God, I think it's July, Tom. I believe it's July.
Okay, or in the summer. Thank you, Nicholas. Post-shaped ball. Welcome back. Mike in Elyria, Ohio. Am I saying that right, Mike?
Elyria, Ohio.
Elyria, okay.
Yes, sir.
So what's up?
Second-time caller, avid one of your book readers.
Thank you.
Yes. Hey, the Walmart experience.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I just saw automotive products, and I had a client that would buy a trainload of Kendall motor oil, and he would pay like $1.09 per quart by trainload.
Mm-hmm.
Walmart would buy the same thing for $1.09 and charge his customers 98 cents. Once he went out of business, once he went out of business, it went back up to $1.29, which he was charging before. For them, and that's just what they do. They put the mom and pop stores out of business, and people go buy from them. And I have never bought anything at Walmart. So I never
predatory pricing is a classic technique. John Rockefeller used the exact same technique in the 1890s to drive his competitors out of business, and then he would buy them up, or simply just run them out of business and take over their customers, and that's the thing that provoked, the aggressive enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act by both progressive Republican Teddy Roosevelt and the guy who followed him, progressive Republican William Howard Taft, and amazing. Mike, thanks for the story. That's a grim one. I appreciate it. Paul in Taos, New Mexico. Hey, Paul. Thanks for listening to the program. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I just want to kind of challenge the frame of an earlier caller calling David Hogg a pipsqueak, and he should have gone on Laura Ingram's show. I mean, all he did was survive a mass murder. Why doesn't she go to the high school and you know, confront him on his terrain instead of him having to go into the mouth of Fox News? I thought that was a really cheap shot of a frame.
Yeah, you're right. And the reframe is a really good one, Paul. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and also while you're there, are you going to be looking for Obama's birth certificate?
We drove by yesterday the apartment where Obama grew up. I mean, it's right here in Honolulu. We drove right by it, and in fact, Barry, our host, the guy who owns the radio station here, I hope it's okay to tell this story, Barry. Barack Obama's mom closed a mortgage that he was participating in. I mean, you know, everybody knew them. They were right here on the island. It was like, you know. So I don't think anybody here is doubting the birth certificate at all.
Well,
Paul, thanks a lot for the call.
I miss having a real president. I miss having a real president.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you.
Me too. Instead, we got a reality star. Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Chuck in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hi, just a quick question. In the past, you've talked about a constitutional convention that certain states have asked for that to be in the opening of that.
I have called for a constitutional amendment, not a constitutional convention. I think a constitutional convention could be a disaster.
Well, yeah, but isn't there so many states that have already said they're looking for a convention? I'm not asking that you agree with it, okay? But aren't there a certain amount of states that have already, the legislators have said we want a convention?
You're right. Yes, I think we're at 30 or 32, and it takes 34 to call it and either 36 or 38 to ratify it.
Okay, so everything that we're seeing from this administration is a rigid figure in the face of progressives, okay? Or even people that like the Constitution.
Even moderates. Yeah.
Beg pardon?
Even moderates, yeah.
Yeah, moderates, even moderates. So what's the chances that everything that these guys are doing right now, like taking and changing the EPA and all this stuff, is just emboldening the revolution to keep going and say, yeah, we need a constitutional convention because the federal government is too powerful?
I think it absolutely is emboldening the if I understand your question correctly, I think that the hard right in the United States and the billionaires, I mean, you know, what's behind all this basically is the Koch network and a few other right-wing billionaires. And they want to modify the Constitution to turn America formally into an oligarchy, in my opinion.
Right.
I mean, they haven't come out and said that, but it sure seems, you know, if you look at all the various kinds of legislation and legislators that they've sponsored, they've been pro-oligarchy positions. And so, you know, as Franklin Roosevelt said in his 1936 speech when he accepted the nomination for his second term as president, you know, they have reached out and seized the levers of government, and you know, and they have shown us that government by organized money is as dangerous as government by organized mob. And I would say that they're turning into both. I mean, there's this mob of Trump supporters, and you know. Weirdly enough, by the way, it's not people making under $50,000. Trump did not win that group, but he did win the people making over $50,000, and definitely won the group making over $100,000. And so there's this whole big pro-oligarchy thing that's being completely minimized and ignored by the corporate media in this country. And that's the problem that we have. And thank God Jimmy Carter's out there talking about it, you know, and somebody's willing to say it. You know, we live now in an oligarchy, and we've got to get back to being a democratic republic. Chuck, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back. It's coming up on the top of the hour here. We'll be right
back. You're listening to Thom Hartmann. From United Nations.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, let's just take a broad look at what this administration and the Republican Party all across the country are up to right now. Good Twitty was tweeting last week well, actually on March 31st, that just a few days ago, that a black mother in Texas who accidentally voted before her parole ended. You get this? Now, in many states, I think in most states, as long as you're not in jail, you can vote. But in the voter suppression states, in the states that have large black and Hispanic populations that the local white power structure is trying to keep down, historically, one of the ways that they keep people down is by criminalizing almost everything. So large numbers of people become criminals, and then preventing people who have a criminal background from voting, making it illegal. And in Texas, it's illegal to vote when you're on parole. This woman did not know that. She is black. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for voting while on probation. On the other hand, the former chair of the GOP in that state, Steve Curtis, was convicted of voter fraud. He's white. He was sentenced to probation. So there's that. Then there's, Ryan Zinke lying about the public lands. Ryan Zinke is the Secretary of the Interior. He's in charge of our public parks and our public lands, which he is aggressively profitizing. I used to say privatizing. I want to start saying profitizing more, and because that's really what it is. It's like, how can we make a profit off public lands? And he said that the $18 billion investment that we're going to make is, bigger than Roosevelt's $3 billion in the CCC and would amount to 53. Anyhow, PolitiFact rates his comment where he said that this is the Interior Department's making the largest investment in our public lands infrastructure in our nation's history as false. Ryan Zinke is a liar, according to PolitiFact, the Washington Post political fact checker. But it's really, these are symptomatic of a larger trend. And that is that the Republican Party, and now that they have power, is doing at the national level what they've done at the state level for years and years when they seize control of individual states. And that is basically making life easier for corporations and billionaires and harder for everybody else. For example, there's a fascinating piece over at the Washington Post, and the title of it is How the New Tax Law Will Affect Your Home Equity Line of Credit and Second Mortgage. Now, what many people have done over the years is, you know, they've got a home, they've got a mortgage, say they've got a home that's worth $150,000 and they've got a $100,000 mortgage on it, and their kid wants to go to college. They can get a student loan for 7 or 8%, but you can get a mortgage for 4%. So what they do is, or maybe 4.5% or 5% for a second mortgage. So what they do is they get a second mortgage. The interest is tax deductible, whereas the interest on student loans is not. So the interest is tax deductible, and if there's a crisis, you know, somebody gets sick and the family is broke or whatever, if there's a crisis, you can always declare bankruptcy on that second mortgage. You can walk away from it. You can't walk away from student loans. The Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005 that you know, was championed by both Republicans and Democrats, tragically, made it illegal for student loans to be discharged via bankruptcy. So if you've got a student loan, you are stuck for the rest of your life. And if it's from from one of the private corporations, they will can and will come after you aggressively. 16 ways to Sunday. We've got people who are having that because they co-sign student loans for their kids or their grandkids. People who are on Social Security getting their Social Security payments garnished by student loans. I mean, that's how aggressive student loans are. So there's that, and then the credit card companies. They're charging anywhere from 15 to 30%, 29%, I think is the maximum. And a lot of these credit cards, it's just obscene what people are having to pay in credit card interest. And so, again, rather than paying 27 or 29% interest on your credit card, a lot of people say, well, that's crazy. I'm going to get a second mortgage on my house and pay off the credit card. And the second mortgage, the interest in the second mortgage is tax deductible, which credit card debt is not. So it's even a better deal. I mean, these are things that help the middle class. But the student loan companies and the credit card companies came to the Republicans, their lobbyists came to the Republicans, and they said, screw the middle class. We don't give a rat's ass about the middle class. These people are using a loophole in the law that allows them to get, it's not even a loophole. I mean, it's just these people are getting second mortgages on their homes. They're paying a lower interest rate. We're not making as much profit. And if they declare bankruptcy, we can't take them down. We can't destroy their lives. We can't hound them until they're 80 years old. So please change the rules. And sure enough, here we go. This from the Washington Post. HELOCs, this is a particular type of mortgage, first mortgage, and second mortgages will no longer be deductible if you use that money. Now just consider how intrusive this is, right? Used to be if you went to get, if you had a home worth $150,000 and you had a $100,000 mortgage and you wanted to borrow $20,000 on your home, you simply go in and show the bank and the IRS, ultimately, when you claim your tax deduction, that you can pay you've got enough income to pay that second mortgage, and they give you the second mortgage. Well, now you've got to say what you're going to use the money for. Talk about big government, right? The Republicans are, oh, big government's a terrible thing. This is as intrusive as it gets. Again, back to this sentence/paragraph out of the Washington Post. Second mortgages will no longer be deductible if the loan proceeds are used to pay for personal items including college tuition, credit card debt, or student loan debt, or a vehicle or clothing. Now, I don't know that people are taking out loans to buy clothing, but you take out loans to buy vehicles too, and the rates are higher than second mortgages. So what they did is they just changed the tax law so that working class Americans, middle class Americans, can no longer borrow, or at least no longer deduct the interest from the loans, which is a pretty important thing, can no longer borrow on a second mortgage
in order to put their kids through school can no longer borrow on a second mortgage to pay off obscene credit card, pay off their credit cards so they don't have to pay obscene credit card interest rates, can no longer borrow to pay off student debt, to pay off student loans. You can if you could still, legally, you can still borrow the money and pay off your student loan with it, but you can't deduct the interest. So you get whacked. It's like they took a steel pipe and put it to the back of our knees, just bang. And this is these are the big banks who own the Republican Party. These are the car dealers and car. GM is one of the biggest banks in the country. And they basically own their own banks to make loans on car loans. This is this is the big colleges. This is the student loan companies. This is obscene. Okay, so that's one thing, right? That's just one thing. There's a whole bunch of these. 67 environmental rules. This is what everybody's talking about Scott Pruitt and whether he's flying first class. Well, obviously he is. The guy's a bum, but he's already overturned 33 rules, including a proposed ban on a pesticide that can kill you, flood building standards, new coal leases on public lands. He did a freeze on that. Methane reporting requirements. Methane, one of the gases that causes global warming. I'll share more of this with you when we come back from the break. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm talking broadly here about the corruption that is represented by the Republican Party and the Trump administration. This is obscene. And welcome back. On the line with us, Bob from Desert Hot Springs, California. Hey, Bob, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Well, hi, Tom. My pleasure. A very simple question to ask. I don't think they're packaging this whole gun situation. It really shouldn't be gun control. It's gun safety. That's what we're all talking about. What does gun safety have to do with the Second Amendment? That's my question.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, nothing. But I think that if you wanted to put it entirely in the gun safety frame, the gun industry has developed ways to have guns that are self-locking, guns that recognize the user. They now have chipped guns where, if you're wearing a watch that has a chip in it, the gun senses that and it unlocks the gun. There's a lot of new technologies that are available that the gun industry has just been fighting tooth and nail that would make guns safer. And that should be a broader part of gun control legislation. But gun control is suggesting we're gonna have some regulations that determine who can and who cannot get a gun and under what circumstances, whereas gun safety has to do with how the guns are made. I'm not sure conflating them is that good an idea, Bob.
No, because wouldn't gun safety be considered if somebody is mentally not right to have a gun? Wouldn't that be considered gun safety?
No, I'd call that gun control. I think gun safety has to do with with the gun itself. I understand your attempt to reframe it, and I applaud it. I think it's great. I just don't. I think that gun owners would push back on you on that, and even gun owners who agree with you. Gun safety, in my mind, is two things. It's training, which should be part of gun control. I mean, I've called for people to have a license, just like a driver's license, prove their proficiency with a gun for years, and I've called for that for years. And how it's manufactured, whether it's a. Now, I suppose you could put gun safety. You could use gun safety as a rubric or an excuse or whatever you want to call it, to call for eliminating semi-automatic weapons along with automatic weapons. That might work.
Right, because I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, Tom. I just think gun safety sounds better than gun control, because when you say gun control, people are like, you're going to take my guns away. Nobody's talking about taking a gun away. They just want more safety.
Yeah, and nobody likes to be controlled. I mean, maybe gun regulation should be, or weapons regulation, actually.
Yes.
I mean, even taking the word gun out of it and call them weapons, because that's what they are. Weapons regulation would make a lot more sense.
Right.
Yeah. I think, though, that this whole thing of the technological changes that have been made recently, particularly for something like, a high-end rifle that can kill a lot of people, I think you can build a really strong case that should have a, it should have a chip. It should only be used by the person who bought it. But on the other hand, in most of these mass murders, the people who used the gun were the people who bought them. So that's not necessarily going to stop anything. So gun regulation, we got it, Bob. Thanks a lot. Thanks for brainstorming this with me. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour.
I think that putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing.
Thom Hartmann here with you. And I wanted to get back to some of this insane political corruption. This is what Scott Pruitt has done. This is from the New York Times, by the way. This is what Scott Pruitt has done. He's got 10 rules that are rollbacks that are in limbo. He's got 24 rollbacks in progress and 33 rules that have been overturned. The ones that have been overturned now, these are rules that are designed to protect to protect you and me, to protect average people, to protect communities, to protect human beings. And some of these rules, yes, indeed, cost billionaires or the companies that they own a little extra money. But they're designed to protect us. And Scott Pruitt has done away with this list that I'm going to share with you. He's just blown them right flat out of the water. And why the media is not talking about this instead of the fact that he's flying first class, I don't understand, because this is the reason Donald Trump is keeping him on. He has done away with flood building standards. So now if you live in a flood zone, or excuse me, if you move to a town where you're not familiar with where the floods happen and where they don't, and some real estate guy says, hey, I got a great place for you to build your house. It's right here. I can get this land for you for only $500 an acre or whatever. Just build your house there. You'll have a great time. And he doesn't tell you it's in a floodplain. And when you talk to a contractor, the contractor doesn't say, well, there's standards for building in a floodplain. I mean, we've got to put this thing on pilings at the very least because this floods every 30 years or something like that. All that's gone. Nobody has to tell you anything. You can get totally screwed. That's number one. Number two, there was a pesticide, I'm forgetting the name of chlorpyrifos or something like that, that causes neurological damage to children. And pesticides end up in our food. And the Obama administration was preparing to ban it. And Ryan Zinke took down that proposed ban and said, no, that pesticide's just fine. There was a freeze on new coal leases on public lands. We don't need any more coal. And, new coal leases, is this a good thing? No. So the Obama administration had frozen that and said, no more coal leases. These, by the way, when they go into public lands like this and take the coal out, it doesn't create a lot of jobs. The whole idea of the coal miners down in the mine, maybe in West Virginia, but that ain't happening out in Utah or Oklahoma or something like that. They just go in with giant, machinery. I mean, giant machinery, stuff that looks like it's out of a Steven Spielberg novel or movie, and just rip up the land. So that's been undone. The requirement that if you're drilling for natural gas, or if you're a refinery, that you have to report how much methane you're allowing to escape into the atmosphere, so that we can know how much damage this greenhouse gas that's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so that we can know how much damage it's doing. That requirement was in place. It's been there for some time. And also methane, methane usually doesn't exist just by itself. Natural gas, for example, not only contains methane, it contains benzene and toluene and a bunch of other high fractions, petroleum distillate fractions, that cause cancer. So this isn't just about global warming. It's also about, are you poisoning the local community? We want to know. The federal government wants to know, or wanted to know. Scott Pruitt has done away with that. No more methane reporting requirement. You can dump all the crap, all the methane into the air, and all the chemicals that go with it you want. There was a rule that said that coal companies could not dump their waste in rivers because it poisons the river, right? It poisons the wildlife, and mostly downriver from there, people are getting their water out of those rivers. So there was a rule that said coal companies can't do that. Big Coal lobbied the Trump administration. Scott Pruitt says, no problem. They did away with the rule. So our rivers are poisoned. They made the decision on the Keystone XL pipeline. You know the whole story on that. And the Dakota Access Pipeline as well. They did away with third-party settlement funds. These were, well, I don't know enough about it to actually describe that, so I'll just leave that as it is. They undid the ban, the offshore drilling ban in the Atlantic and the Arctic. And then to help Rick Scott get elected to the Senate from Florida, Trump said, but we'll exempt Florida. No drilling off the coast of Florida. No drilling off, on the beach off Mar-a-Lago. Because remember Michael Moore said he's buying a drilling rig and he was going to drill outside Mar-a-Lago? There used to be a ban on using seismic air guns in the Atlantic to test for where you could find oil, and it's because they were killing porpoises and dolphins and whales and things and wildlife. They were just blowing their ears out, and they would beach themselves and be freaked out. They did away with that ban. They did away with royalty regulations for oil, gas, and coal. They did away with the inclusion of greenhouse gas emissions in environmental reviews. You know what? If you have to do an environmental review, it doesn't matter what the greenhouse gases are. They did away with the permit issuing process for new infrastructure projects. They did away with the Green Climate Fund contributions. They did away with the endangered species listings. They did away with the ban on hunting wolves and grizzly bears. They did away with the protections for whales and sea turtles. They did away with the ban on water bottles in national parks. They did away with the environmental mitigation for federal projects. They did away with the planning rule for public lands. I mean, it just goes, I'm halfway through the list.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is just obscene what Scott Pruitt has done, and it's just one small piece of the overall corruption that is the Trump administration and the modern Republican Party.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won. Education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from KWAI 1080 AM in Honolulu, Hawaii, and so pleased to be here with you. Let's pick up some phone calls. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, I think how we can frame our political reality now is that we're moving in a direction, I would call it toward the direction of dictatorship of the billionaire class, in the same way that the Soviet Union had, you know, state Marxist type of system where everything was run from the top. They want to turn everything over to the neoliberal economy and just, you know, let that solve all problems. And it doesn't work, you know, and it just is never going to work. It's about as rigid and deterministic as I would say a Marxist-run government, you know, or a fascist-run government. In the end, it's just going to fall. It doesn't really meet people's needs, you know, for all the reasons that you say on this program, even today. You know, it just isn't working, and it doesn't answer the problems that ordinary people, all the people in between, the poorest people and the richest people, and well, the poor are included with the middle class. The rich, you know, they have whatever they want. They can go anywhere. They have freedom. They can develop as human beings. More and more so, the rest of us are not going to be able to. We are going to become a feudal class of people.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, John, except that you put it all in the context of the future. And I would say it's happening right now in the present,
right, yeah,
that we are already there. I think we are already in a feudal society.
Right.
And this is why people are killing themselves with opiates.
Right, and you know what?
Among other things.
You know, as you say, we need to get involved. What else do we have left to do? You know, it's a responsibility that we all have. However we can be involved, we need to fight to change this. And we have, and you know, these young people are really showing that it's possible to make inroads into this, and to show how morally bankrupt, how ignorant, how stupid this system is. It's affecting all of the world, and it's affecting this country, and we have a responsibility to each other here in this country and the rest of the citizens of the world. That the world is a much smaller place, and we're responsible. We're the wealthiest country in the world, you know, and it doesn't have to be like this. It's just a choice, really.
Yeah, agree. We are the wealthiest country in the world for the moment. I'm not sure that the EU hasn't already beat us, and China is rising fast. Although the EU is not a country, but you know, functionally, it you know, in many ways, it resembles one. But you nailed it, John. Very well said. Thank you very much for the call. Sue in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Hey, Sue, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to share with you and your readers in this week's Rolling Stone article. There's a whole thing about pig raising in North Carolina. What they're doing, it's can I say the name of the corporation?
Right.
Can I do
corporate
that?
hog farms. There are people. This is one of. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Did you read the article?
No, I did not, but I'm familiar with the issue. This is what CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, Tom Lindsay, has been fighting these guys for years and years on behalf of communities up and down the East Coast, and these giant hog farms and whatnot. They're doing it with local democracy.
I'm sorry. This is in the Rolling Stone, and what they are, China is going to buy out Smithfield operation that raises hogs because the feed is cheaper and the lax environmental regulations in red states. So it's more profitable for China to raise their pig farm operations here, but it's impacting our environment. The pig waste.
Leave the poison in the waste for us, yeah.
oh, the waste is horrible, and it's in ponds that are not lined with concrete or plastic or anything, and it's leaching into the water table.
Yeah,
and the poor people that live,
that's grim.
And the poor people that live around these farms are being sprayed. They take it and spray it as fertilizer, and it's causing health problems for these poor, they're mostly poor, rural, working people that live close to these operations.
Thank you for the heads up on that, Sue. I'll have to get over, after I get off the air, I'll have to get over to the Rolling Stone website and check it out and see if I can find the article. Mike in Salem, Oregon, listening on KMUZ. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, how's it going, Tom?
Great.
I listen to you all the time. You do a great job.
Thank you.
I listened to Clyde Lewis out of Portland, and last night he was talking about fake news, and I think his whole 4 hours he maybe mentioned Fox News twice. But he sure.
I don't know who this guy is. I'm sorry. Is he a conservative commentator?
Hello?
Yeah. Is this a conservative commentator you're talking about, Mike? I don't know who he is.
Yes.
I don't recognize the name. Okay.
He's at Portland, Clyde Lewis.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so he's talking about fake news, and he's not pointing out that Fox News is probably the biggest purveyor of fake news in the United States that get debunked almost daily by MediaMatters.org.
I know. I'm so glad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well said, Mike. Mike, thank you very much for the call. I generally don't like to talk about other talk show hosts, but you know, there we are. Van in Lewis Center, Ohio. Hey, Van, what's on your mind today?
Oh, it's good to see you, Tom. Geez, I've been going up and down listening to you. God, my emotions are all over the place. But I really need that list of what you had earlier about how they're destroying our country and everything. If I can find out how to get that list, I would love to see it.
I was reading from two articles, Van. One was in the New York Times, the one about banking and all that. Hang on just a second. Let me just double check. I can tell you exactly what they were and where they were and what the...
Okay.
The one from the New York Times... the New York Times was the one that was titled 67 Environmental Rules on the Way Out Under Trump. And you can find that on the New York Times website. And then the Washington Post article about how you can no longer use your money from your second mortgage to pay off a student loan and still have your mortgage be tax deductible, the interest on it, is from the Washington Post, and it's titled How the New Tax Law Will Affect Your Home Equity Line of Credit and Second Mortgage. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, but I was calling because I was saying what is worse than what we think, and you start sprouting out that. But what I really believe in my heart is that Trump is Putin's student. Putin is a teacher. I don't believe that Trump is talking to him like when the Russians let us know when he's talking to him. I really believe he's talking to him every day, if not every day, at least a couple times a week. And I believe that, you know, everything is right in front of us. We just don't see it. And the fact that Putin is, when you see them, they're like they're talking to each other. I know they are. Putin let us think that he can't speak English. I believe he can speak English. And I believe they're having conversations that we have no idea, you know, what's going on. And he's teaching him how to get to where, you know, Putin is, but not quite where Putin is, because Putin want to be the most powerful one out of the two of them. So that's what's been going on with me. And what do you think about that? Because the fact that he's
Van,
it's
I
so
think that
weird.
I think that you're giving Putin way too much credit here. Trump is pursuing an oligarchic policy here in the United States. In other words, put the billionaires in charge. Putin has overseen the rise of billionaires in Russia. It wasn't Putin's idea. The economy was reconfigured during the Yeltsin administration with help from the United States. It was Milton Friedman and his students at the Chicago School of Economics that went over to Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed and said, here's how to organize your economy. And the Russian economy was organized along broadly conservative and libertarian lines. And that, of course, when you have libertarianism, you end up with oligarchy. I mean, it's just absolutely predictable. And so now Putin is an oligarch, and you've got all these other oligarchs who are good buddies with him. But to say that because they have gone in that direction in Russia, we're going in that direction in the United States, as I said, I think gives Putin way too much credit. We have our own billionaires here. We have our own oligarchs who are trying to create a fascistic state, a state that is controlled by private business. And to a large extent, they've succeeded. And this is an effort that's been going on since the Reagan administration, when Putin was still working in East Berlin as a KGB agent. So, yeah, Putin, there's some problems with the relationship. They are the other big nuclear power in the world, and I think that we need to pay attention to that, and we should have a good relationship with them. There are other countries that are far more brutal, shall we say, toward their people that we're sucking up to, we're loving. Look at Duterte in the Philippines, murdering people who use drugs. He's killed over 10,000 people, empowering the police to do that. There are regimes all over the world, Saudi Arabia, and their oppression of women and minorities and everybody else. Look at what just happened in Gaza. I mean, with Israel, there's a number of countries that are very problematic in their behaviors that we just give a pass to. But I think that the big problem that we have with this rise of oligarchy in the United States is entirely homegrown, Van. I don't think that that's coming from Russia. Van, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for watching the program. We'll be back. We're live from KWAI, 1080 AM in Honolulu, Hawaii. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Luke Vargas and find out what's going on in the world today, plus back to your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, we had teachers before in the 1940s and 1950s who didn't have to worry about college debt, but now we have teachers who are barely making ends meet, working 2 or 3 jobs, and some even resorting to becoming escort service. Why don't the teachers also ask for college debt forgiveness like federal employees? And I think other states should follow suit, too, in the strike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we are treating our teachers like crap. I mean, it's terrible how we're treating our teachers, and we really need to clean that up. But the teachers in Oklahoma and before that in West Virginia and Kentucky are really, showing us what it means to stand up for what you believe in and the interests of the people that you serve. In this case, their students. So very, very well said, Dean. Thank you very much for the call. Richard in Oklahoma City. Speaking of Oklahoma, Richard in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hey, Richard, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech. Richard? No, Richard. Okay, let's try Peter in Miami, Florida. Hey, Peter, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
How are you today? I used to watch you all the time on RT and enjoy your show. But anyways, I've got a lot of things on my mind today. What compelled me to call, though, was I saw your little vignette on Trump grabbing this person and grabbing that person and doing this and doing that. We got to remember that people that are like my age and your age and Trump's age, we all grew up in the sexual revolution where doing things like that was okay. It's not okay. I do agree with you on that point right away. But back then, sex was everywhere, and it didn't really matter who you grabbed, and everybody just kind of took it light at it. And
yeah, this was before diseases and things. The only diseases out there were.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Peter.
So I just kind of feel like the more the left complains about Donald Trump, the more his supporters love him even more. And
I think that
don't
we need
know
to
if-
stop complaining about his sexual peccadillos and his affairs. I think that stuff is fairly obvious, and they are not impeachable offenses. We know that because Bill Clinton didn't successfully get removed from office. You know, he was indicted, he was impeached, but he was not convicted in the Senate. This is not the stuff that we should be focusing on, frankly, in my opinion.
Thank you,
I think
Tom.
the thing that will take down Trump is his corruption, not his ties to Russia, and not his the way he treats his wife. I guess it would be the way to say that.
Right, but we got to remember, Tom, that that all the presidents in the last, since I remember, have all been corrupt. Even the Clintons, they were no angels. Neither was George Bush. He was no angel. We've had these oligarchs going on for decades. It's not just because of Trump
that doesn't mean we shouldn't rise up and do something about it, Peter. I mean, now is the time to take our country back, essentially, and we need to do that. Peter, excellent point though about the sexual scandals. I agree with you. Thank you for the call, and we'll be back in just a second. Luke Vargas will be with us with Talk Media News. Stick around. Did you say there's a live read here, Sean? Is Luke Vargas from Talk Media News. Luke is the, hang on just a second, I just lost it. Luke is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Luke, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
New York and more than a dozen states have officially sued the federal government today over this citizenship question that Trump wants to put on the census. What's the outcome? What's the most probable outcome of these lawsuits?
I think this New York one probably stands the best chance, not just because they've increased their standing here by bringing in a lot of different states, including states that have smaller immigrant populations, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, a bunch of cities have also joined on this. The arguments presented here, two of them basically directly mirror lawsuits last week from California and the NAACP. So that's arguing the constitutionality of this, saying that this new census question would violate the constitutional mandate to conduct an actual enumeration of the country's population, not just its citizens. The legal experts I've talked to have suggested this will be relatively difficult to prove because the government has counter maneuvers, that it could basically keep sort of whittling this down, a lot like they did with the travel ban, where you maybe throw in one non-Muslim country and then you can have some evidence to say, hey, we're not trying to target X, Y, or Z. And so there's a little wiggle room there. On standing, they could probably get this case heard, but the lawsuits we saw last week probably would not have done much more than at least staying the implementation of this new census question. The suit today from New York is a little bit different because it throws in a contention that this new rule is arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act, that as a non-formal agency action, basically by not going through any of the proper channels to vet a census question, a procedure that usually takes years, where you've got to focus group these sorts of things, see what kind of impact there is on the amount
Test
of
them in the
respondents,
field. Yeah.
that this is arbitrary and capricious. So legal experts I've talked to said this is probably the most likely argument to succeed, that, you know, by making this decision about the census question so late in the preparation of this, by bypassing all of the proper channels for vetting a question, that there could be a political motivation at the heart of this. And this takes me back to the travel bans from last year, when in courts you saw statements by people like Rudy Giuliani, the president, tweets and things like that being brought up to show that the administration, what it was doing on paper, was very different from what it intended to do in other sorts of private and public remarks. So I think that is the avenue here where there might be some meat on the bone.
That's good. Also, Trump says he's going to announce the outlines of a new NAFTA deal as early as next week. Do we know anything about that?
We know that only 6 of the 30 chapters of this free trade agreement have been agreed upon, which to me suggests what the administration is trying to do here is force Canada and Mexico to agree to a bunch of things that aren't in their best interest at the last minute. And if and when they probably don't cave in on everything, the Trump administration will blame those countries for holding things up. The reason the timeline here is quite constrained is there are Mexican presidential elections in the summer. The Mexican delegation handling the NAFTA talk has repeatedly said, going back to August when the NAFTA talks got underway, that if the deal isn't ready by the end of April, that they're going to have to break away because they won't even have time to consult the bill, to move it through the Mexican Senate for consultations. And so we're up against this really hard deadline. Less than a quarter of the agreement has been finalized, still out really major issues like how the percentage of an automobile that needs to be made in the United States. You haven't seen any consensus on those. So I'm looking at this. I don't see Mexico and Canada anywhere near thinking they have a done deal, but the administration is trying to sort of push this through, I think, to create a scapegoat if and when this thing doesn't actually come together by the end of April.
Yeah, and it's going to get much more complex after the summer when Mexico probably gets a new president who's a very outspoken nationalist and progressive. And I'm the part of it that I'm keeping an eye on is Section 13. That's the part that allows private corporations to sue governments, city, state, and federal governments in the United States, and county governments too. And I know Peter Navarro. I've interviewed him on this program. I know that that's one of the things he strongly objects to, and he's helping run this thing. Anyhow, Malaysia has passed a new law criminalizing fake news. Who decides what's fake and what isn't?
The government, which is pretty handy when you have upcoming elections and when your prime minister is embroiled in a multi-billion-dollar embezzlement scandal. The Department of Justice is currently investigating the Malaysian prime minister and his associates on the charges that they took billions of dollars out of a state-run fund and made gains from that. So it's pretty convenient now.
This is the American Department of Justice?
Yes, correct. Going back to last year, they've been probing this. You saw the State Department come out today and condemn this. Of course, this same prime minister was one of the first people to get an invitation to golf with President Trump. So you have a very discordant response from the administration here, sort of saying, oh, we think it's terrible that another country would be making a big deal out of fake news and damaging the prospect of free speech. On the other hand, the White House is sending completely different signals about this.
Is there some Malaysian equivalent to Fox News?
I'm sure there are, and there are a lot fewer independent outlets over the last few years there. So the assault on speech began a long time ago and could only intensify, it seems.
Amazing. Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent for Talk Media News. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, tomsbeets, THOMSBEETS.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from America's Battle for Media Democracy, The Triumph of Corporate Libertarianism and the Future of Media Reform by Victor Pickard. This is from the chapter number 4, page 98. It's titled The Origins of the Fairness Doctrine. Barely a year had passed since the Blue Book controversy when similar conflicts over public interest regulation re-emerged. This round of contentious debates centered on whether to repeal the Mayflower Doctrine, which prohibited broadcasters from editorializing politically. Broadcasters' growing political power emboldened them to challenge the Larry Fly-era FCC decision, which would spark the last major radio reform battle of the 1940s. Fearing a further commercialized, conservative-biased, corporate-dominated medium should broadcasters gain the right to editorialize, many progressives saw at stake, as one news article put it, the future of radio as an instrument of service to the people. Reformers marshaled considerable support from the still intact coalition from the Blue Book debates to rally for the Mayflower decision's preservation. Similar to those debates, broadcasters attacked the reformers' position with First Amendment rights arguments that aimed to delegitimize the FCC's regulatory power over broadcast programming. This episode involved a number of ironies. Most notably, the controversial rule that later became known as the Fairness Doctrine, which to this day is often invoked by progressives as the high watermark of enlightened media policy, actually came about as a kind of consolation prize for post-war liberals who had advocated stricter regulation. The following chapter recovers this forgotten history. In doing so, it lays bare a number of early tensions and contradictions that closed out a decade of contentious policy debates around normative understandings of media's democratic role. This history throws into sharp relief several significant parallels and connections to 21st century media challenges, particularly around the question of whether government has any affirmative regulatory authority over media. Toward the end of the 1940s, progressive forces were in disarray. The remains of the Popular Front, including many New Deal liberals, were largely disintegrated, especially after the Progressive Party's disastrous loss in the 1948 election. What had been a rising social democratic challenge was now widely seen as dangerously socialistic, even in its diminished state. With a communist witch hunt in full swing, the broadcast industry exploited Cold War politics to discredit reformers by claiming that the reformers' real agenda was to destroy free radio. J. Edgar Hoover harassed the FCC on a regular basis with letters and unsolicited reports on subversive broadcasters. And the FCC's actions were aggressively scrutinized as Congress and the FBI put the commission on notice for a number of unofficial investigations. Writing to Larry Fly, this is the FCC commissioner, about the endless red baiting, Clifford Durr confided, "When I read of the present plans to protect the country against the dangerous thinking of us bureaucrats, I'm inclined to look back with nostalgia on the days when the Commission stood more or less firmly against our friend J. Edgar." By the late 1940s, the FCC's more progressive wing, aside from Durr, had become more passive on issues related to regulatory oversight of broadcasting programming. The tide clearly had turned in the favor of the commercial broadcasters. Rendering the landscape even less hospitable for media reform, the industry attacks against the FCC coincided with an increasingly right-wing tilt in D.C. politics. Even before the 1948 presidential election, liberals were in various states of retreat.
FDR had died, the New Deal agenda lay in tatters, and Republicans were coming off a congressional sweep in the 1946 midterm elections. The Democrats would regain some ground electorally by taking back Congress in '48, but the ideological shift was more permanent. During his campaign, President Truman characterized 1948 as the decisive year of the challenge, with a primary choice between, quote, between a parcel labeled progressive liberalism and a parcel labeled reactionary conservatism, end quote. However, Truman's liberalism often proved to be largely rhetorical. After he eked out a victory in a four-way race, his administration quickly shied away from the previous administration's aggressive liberalism, ever mindful of Southern conservative Democrats and Republicans nipping at their flanks. Truman's market-friendly orientation led him to espouse commercial broadcasters' policy positions. Invoking his support for the, quote, American system, end quote, of broadcasting, he insisted in an open letter to Broadcasting Magazine's Sol Taishoff that, quote, America, as the birthplace of radio, should have a free, competitive system unfettered by artificial barriers and regulated only as to the laws of nature and the limitation of facilities, end quote. Deferring to the laws of the market, Truman ordered is, quote, preferred over rigid government regulation of a medium that by its very nature must be maintained as free as the press, end quote. The same issue of broadcasting contained an editorial amplifying Truman's message to the FCC that regulation was to be off the table. A similar statement followed 10 months later with Broadcasting triumphantly announcing that Truman, quote, emphatically reaffirmed his belief in completely free radio, end quote, which according to the editors translated into, quote, a declaration on behalf of a broadcasting system unshackled by un-American regulations, end quote. It's amazing. America's battle for media democracy, the triumph of corporate libertarianism and the future of media reform. All.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us, Stephen Miles. He is the director of Win Without War at the Center for International Policy, the website for the Center for International Policy, CIPonline.org. You can tweet him at SPMiles42 or CIP Online. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Hey, good to be on, Tom.
Thanks for joining us today. We had an American soldier killed in Syria a day or three ago, and this, Congress never declared war on Syria. Congress never declared war, frankly, on any place in that region. We haven't had an actual war declaration since 1941. But here we are. We're in the middle of this war, and then on top of that, it sure looks to me like Trump is putting together a war cabinet. He's getting rid of people who are more, who actually have military experience, actually know the horrors of war, and replacing them with, essentially draft dodgers like John Bolton and himself, and Trump himself, and Mike Pence and others. What's your take on what's going on here, or what do you think is actually going on? I mean, you're a graduate of the London School of Economics and Tulane University, of academic expertise on humanitarian interventions in Middle Eastern politics. What are you seeing happening here?
Well, Tom, I think you hit the nail on the head. By all appearances, Donald Trump is putting together a war cabinet. This is a president who not only inherited a number of American wars, but in every theater of combat that he inherited, he's doubled down on U.S. war making. He sent more troops to Afghanistan. He's increased our military operations in Iraq and Syria. He's sent more troops into places like Somalia, and we're seeing a continuation of war in places like Yemen. So this president, already on war footing, is now putting around him people like John Bolton, who look out at the world. They see problems like North Korea. They see challenges like the U.S. has with Iran, and they see only one solution: the U.S. military. They see war as the solution. They see regime change as the solution, and it should be troubling to all Americans that these are now who the president is surrounding himself with.
What would be the appropriate response to what's going on in the Middle East, for example? Or, I mean, Syria, arguably, on the edge of the Middle East, but you know what I'm talking about, the whole region, and Northern Africa, for that matter. I mean, we've got problems in Libya going on right now. So, back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the president's doing all this right as we're marking the 15th anniversary of the start of the Iraq War back in 2003. Now, there's very few people in the world who look at what George W. Bush did and what's happened in the intervening 15 years and said, the Iraq War was a good idea. That's how we should do American foreign policy. But that seems to be the lesson that this president is now putting forward. He's surrounding, again, himself with people like John Bolton, people like Mike Pompeo, people like Gina Haspel, folks who not only do not view the Iraq War as a problem, but they view it as an example for how we should conduct American foreign policy going forward. So you have to ask yourself how this president, who ran an election claiming that he was against Iraq, claiming that he was against stupid wars, has done nothing but govern the absolute opposite way. I mean, I know it won't be a shock to people that Donald Trump has a tenuous relationship with the truth and is willing to change his mind from one minute to the next, but here his actions are clearly speaking louder than any words he's ever uttered. He's doubling, tripling down on war, and it's looking like he's thinking about the Iraq War and thinking that's what we need more of.
Back in 2003, 2004, as the Iraq War was starting to unravel, well, actually, I mean, the war lasted a few weeks. It just took us a couple of weeks to take down Saddam Hussein and seize the country. Everything from that point till now, in my opinion, has been an occupation. And occupations tend not to work all that well. I mean, just ask the British soldiers who tried to occupy North America in 1776. But one of the stories that we heard as the occupation was unraveling, as they were looting the national museums, as they were, burning buildings down, as people were being killed in the streets indiscriminately after L. Paul Bremer had come in and laid off anybody who had any affiliation with Saddam Hussein's political party, the Ba'ath Party, and fired 500,000 people in the military who got to go home and keep their guns, was that Bremer and Rumsfeld were trying to do an economic experiment. They wanted to have, there had never been a country in the world where libertarianism had successfully been tried. And Rumsfeld and Bremer believed, and had apparently convinced George W. Bush, that if they got rid of government, if they got rid of all regulations, if they got rid of rules that protected unions, if they got rid of rules that had to do with politics and the Ba'ath Party and all that kind of stuff, if they just basically did, and shut down all the state-run industries, which represented half of Iraq's economy at the time, that if they did all that, that the free market would blossom, 1,000 flowers would bloom, tens of thousands of small businesses would be started by Iraqis, and you would see the growth of an economy and a middle class like you'd never seen before, because Milton Friedman told us this, and it has to be true. Within a few years, I think that they stopped talking like that or even thinking like that, and I'm not sure what, in retrospect, these guys are thinking or saying. But there was that clear economic experiment as a large piece of the decision to invade Iraq and to maintain a presence in Iraq, along with Dick Cheney wanting the oil. Are we seeing that same kind of economic, first of all, your thoughts on what I just said, and secondly, if you don't disagree with me, are we seeing that same kind of economic and ideological positioning behind these wars, or is this just, hey, we broke the Middle East and now we don't know how to fix it other than dropping bombs on people?
Well, look, I need to start where you were, which is that we were sold a bill of goods as the American public on the Iraq War. Various parts of the administration of George W. Bush had all sorts of reasons why they wanted to go into Iraq, why they wanted to invade and occupy that country, why they wanted to change things. It wasn't weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't any sort of liberating of the Iraqi people. It was to pursue a radical agenda dressed up in disguise as something else. And different members of the administration had different agendas. But you're absolutely right. This was not anything that the American public was told. And that is something we're seeing again, right? That is a question we have to ask ourselves about why there are so many organizations in this town dedicated to trying to make the case for violent regime change with Iran. Why are there so many think tanks and experts and others who are interested in this and not just analyzing the problem, but have the same clear, tired example of what we should do violently overthrow the regime and pursue an Iraq-style remake of Iran. Mostly they're the same folks who were behind the Iraq War, and again, we know that they were being disingenuous the last time. But the danger really comes when people in the government, people in the administration, who have these ideas are put into positions of power and then given the opportunity to politicize intelligence, to falsify intelligence, to lie to the American public, right? That's what we saw time and time again with the Iraq War. And so when you look at somebody like Mike Pompeo and you look what he's already done with the politicization of the CIA, with the manipulation of the way the CIA interacts with the media to spread misinformation, what they're doing right now to try to politicize the agency's duty to tell the American public about who Gina Haspel is, given her nomination, what they're doing to gloss over her role of torture, what they're doing to hide the realities of what she did as part of the torture program, you have to conclude that this is a person who should not be put in a position of authority in which they can make another series of misleading statements, of lies, of falsification that might end up putting our country in yet another war that 15 years later you and I will be talking about how much of a disaster it was.
Yeah, she also oversaw the destruction of the tapes, the torture tapes
Exactly.
for the CIA that apparently she was supervising, or at least that's what's being reported. I mean, we'll find out when she goes before the Senate. But to what extent are we doing this on behalf of other actors? I mean, Iran and Israel have a serious problem.
Sure, and in this case, Saudi Arabia is a huge player. You know, we're seeing right now the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who's on a tour around the country. He's meeting with members of Congress. He obviously met with the president. He's now going out west to meet with Hollywood moguls and Silicon Valley bigwigs, executives, investors. So, you know, what the Crown Prince said the other day was that the Iranian regime was worse than Hitler. This is a man who's trying to use the fawning adulation we've seen from folks like Donald Trump for him to achieve his political ends in some sort of regional confrontation. That's a battle that the U.S. has no business being in the middle of, and we should be doing a whole lot more.
Not a good thing.
Yeah.
Stephen Miles, Director of Win Without War at the Center for International Policy. Hang on just a second here.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Website for the Center for International Policy, ciponline.org. You can tweet him at spmiles42 or at ciponline. Thank you, Stephen. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Good to see and hear from you, Tom. I want to mention Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. As good a people as they are, I've not heard them flat come out and denounce capitalism.
I have heard, I can't speak for Elizabeth Warren, but I've certainly heard Bernie on numerous occasions talk about unrestrained capitalism, unregulated capitalism, the danger that it does. I don't think he's willing to, or any American politician would be willing to trash capitalism as a whole, the way that, for example, Richard Wolff would. But, you know, why is that? Go ahead.
Well, I think that's the root cause. Capitalism. Hello?
Is it, in your mind, is it capitalism or is it unregulated capitalism? Because it seems to me that, or at least I've thought for many, many years that appropriately regulated capitalism can work as an economic system. But what we've seen over and over and over again and throughout the history of this country and many other countries around the world is that capitalists will inevitably, even when they're well regulated, will inevitably figure out ways to corrupt the political system. I think the best example is the history of the Powell Memo here in the United States and what they've done since 1971. You know, seizing control of the Supreme Court, seizing control of Congress, seizing control of state houses, all on behalf of capital. And the problem is that, you know, I mean, Bernie comes right out and says, I'm a democratic socialist. Now, that's politics, not economics, but the socialist part, I think, is the economics part. Do you know of any country where capitalism has been ended and it has been replaced with a system that works? I don't.
No, but I don't know where it's been successful either. Ultimately.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
I don't know any place either where it's been successful.
Where capitalism has been successful.
Yeah, where it has not been co-opted and taken over.
Well, the horrible conundrum, James, is that capitalism really can build an economy, can build a country, and we've seen this in the United States. We've seen it repeatedly. That's the upside. The downside is that we had slavery because of capitalism. We had it was the great victory of capitalism prior to the 1830s or the 1860s. We had the oligarchs, the rise of Rockefeller and whatnot. They built railroads. Jay Gould and those guys, all these other oligarchs. They built the railroads, but at what price to our society? But I don't see an easy replacement for capitalism for the growth. That's and then the downside, of course, is that it resembles cancer. I mean, unlimited growth is what cancer cells do.
Yep. One more point, Tom, if I might.
Yeah.
Last week I called in. That lawyer had been on defending the Second Amendment, and he commented that a war, if we tried to control arms the way we have drugs, it would be just as much a failure. And the point he missed, of course, was that the corruptive influence of dishonest controllers that allow for importation and distribution. Now that's why the war on drugs has been ineffective.
Yeah, that was Neil Festerstein. Yeah, I thought that was the weakest argument he made. James, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us there in Spokane on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. IMS.com. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks. Your last guest was talking about Haspel and how she shouldn't be, or is it Haspert? I apologize for not knowing her name well.
I think, yeah.
That she shouldn't be head of CIA. And there's that data set around her having been head of torture in Southeast Asia and the destruction of tapes. But there's another name and another torture victim. It's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and he was tortured in a black site in Poland called Crystal. And Jose Rodriguez, Joe Rodriguez, is the guy that is identified for having destroyed Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's tapes. So, do you know? And can you let us in on where does one story end and where does the other one start?
I think the policy of using torture was spread across CIA sites all over the world once it was authorized by Bush and Trump, by Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and Alberto Gonzalez and that crew, and whether there was whether Gina Haspel, if I like you, I don't remember exactly how she spells her last name. I'm sorry, but whether she specifically gave the order for the entire CIA to be destroying tapes all over the world, or whether she simply took the initiative to do it in Thailand, or whether she got an order from CIA headquarters and did it in Thailand, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think any of us will until she testifies before the Senate. And that's assuming that she testifies truthfully.
Well, Joe Rodriguez has been on, documentaries, and he's validating how he's this good guy, and he even says, "Give me a break. There's no reason for us to treat these people da 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 da." And man, it is like these lapdogs. These. I love that you brought the word forward. Spittle.
Lick spittles.
Lick spittles.
Lick spittle is the old word. Yeah. A guy who's literally willing to lick up the spit of his boss off his shoes or off the ground. It's a phrase that was very common in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and I'd like to bring it back because that's what, when I look at Scott Pruitt and his relationship with Trump and with the Kochs, when I look at Ryan Zinke, when I look at these guys, they're lick spittles.
Yeah. Well, it was in Jack London's The Iron Heel, and I got to see that as a slide in that documentary series Plutocracy. So that was how I learned that word. All right, thank you for what you...
Well, thank you, Rich. Thanks. Yeah, good talking with you. Thank you very much for the call. Brooke in Darien, Illinois. Hey, Brooke, you wanted to talk about the teacher protest? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my call. My sister-in-law is obviously a teacher in Oklahoma, and she's outside the Capitol right now with my nephew. And she told me that the legislature has decided to adjourn for the day today. So all the teachers, if they're at capacity inside the Capitol, they won't, of course, let anybody else in. So they adjourned for the day and went home. And then the other things that
you know what their strategy is here, Brooke. If I may just very quickly interrupt you, their strategy is they believe that if they can delay things, that the teachers will give up and go away.
Correct.
And that's
why
they're
going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. But they also, they had a microphone out, and a few of them were supposed to come out and address the teachers. And then one of their representatives was going to speak. They cut the microphone off. And then my nephew, who's 14, just texted me and said that they turned all the water off in the building so that people cannot use the restrooms. And there are some teachers that were lucky enough that a few legislators were going to have them, set up meetings with them. But they've limited the meeting to 5 minutes. So they're letting teachers come in, to make their point and get their thoughts across and all that. And they're you have to do it in 5 minutes and then you're done. So
unless you have a big campaign contribution.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to give you an update. I mean, MSNBC was covering it this morning, and then now that the president's on, it's off. But I have to give them credit. They had a reporter embedded inside the Capitol, and they said that they're going to stay there as long as the teachers do. And according to my sister-in-law, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be like Virginia. They're going to follow them, and they are going to stay out as long as it takes.
Yeah.
So
that was West Virginia, but yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. So I just want to give you an update as to what's going on, and thank you for the opportunity to do so. And I love what you do. I listen to you every day.
Thanks so much, Brooke, and thank you very much for the call. And thanks for the inside story. That was fascinating. I really appreciate it. We'll be back. It's coming up on the bottom of the hour, 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten.
This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They're about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, doing our show live from KWAI in Honolulu, Hawaii, AM 1080. And tip of the hat and many thanks again to Barry Wagenvort, who owns the station and has been our host here. And you know, it's just great. It's great being here, and I really appreciate it. Chuck in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's pretty clear the Republican coup is underway. My question is, what is the difference between neoconservative and neoliberal, and is the difference the same in Europe? Do they consider it the same, or are they different?
With regard to European use of those terms, I don't know the answer to the question. My understanding of the major difference between those terms is that neoconservatives are concerned about war. Neoconservatives want the United States to be the empire that controls the world, and we control the world through violence, through our military. And so it was neoconservatives who put up the Project for a New American Century, PNAC, that in 1998 was explicitly calling for us to take down Saddam Hussein. Neoliberals are interested in economics. And the word liberal in Europe is what we would call conservative here. What it means is an unregulated economy, basically. It's liberal, so there's no regulations. And today here, we call that libertarianism. So neoliberals are on the libertarian end of the scale. Neoconservatives are like John Bolton. Make sense, Chuck?
Yes, a little different. All right, thank you much.
Yeah, sometimes they're the same people, though. I mean, John Bolton may well be a libertarian economically. I have no idea. All I've ever heard him talk about is war.
That's his specialty, right? Thank you much.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Chuck. Good to hear from you. Greg in Devils Lake, North Dakota. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I got a little geeky science for school safety for you, Tom.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, excuse me. I know you have back problems, or you had, and you've sought different treatments. Did you ever try gait analysis on you?
Gait analysis, G-A-T-E?
Yeah.
Does that have to do with the nervous system?
Well, I saw it in the movie Mission Impossible. Tom Cruise had to break in this place, and the last step security had to get through was gait analysis, where they measure. I thought it was fiction, so I Googled it, and it's real. They measure your body and your movements, your spine, your hips, your knees, everything.
Oh, that's gait, G-A-I-T. Yeah, gait is the way that you move, the way that you walk, the way that you swing your arms, and that's analyzable, and it's functionally like a fingerprint. Everybody moves slightly different than everybody else because, our muscles are not all the same, and our injuries are not all the same, and all those kind of things. And the older we get, the more distinctive our gait, G-A-I-T, not G-A-T-E, becomes. I thought you were talking about, the ability of nerve cells throughout the body to gait, to basically, turn on or turn off, and that can be measured neurologically. But I'm not sure that that's a term of art. But anyway, back to you.
And I was just thinking if they could tweak it to where you walk through a gait analysis into schools, and they tweak it so they can detect weapons, and
yeah, if you're carrying something, even if it's concealed on your body, it will change your gait. You're right, I think that, there's a lot of ways that we can look at this, getting guns out of schools and getting people with guns out of schools. But I think what we need to do is get our guns out of our society. We have over 300 million guns in the United States.
But I'm just saying, I know it would take millions, but hey, if we took some millions out of the defense industry and the gun industry and the NRA, it could be tweaked.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Greg, thanks a lot for the call. Yep, good to hear from you. Thank you. Lawrence in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Lawrence, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm worried about our country's long, slow slide into fascism, like a frog being boiled slowly alive.
I am too. That's why I went through all those lists of things that they're doing in the beginning of this of the second hour of the program. I absolutely agree with you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Lawrence. There's a little bit of a delay here when I'm on a remote.
Everything. There's something new every day. From Trump's despicable actions against a Republican FBI operative to try and fire him before he was eligible for his pension just because his wife had the temerity to run as a Democratic politician.
Right.
This thing with that just flew right out of my head. I've been thinking about it for the last hour. The Sinclair Broadcasting maneuvering to install an additional propaganda machine besides Fox News and to dictate what people are hearing and seeing. This using government power to persecute someone, I'm talking about Jeff Bezos, that Trump sees as a political enemy. This is stuff that
this is the war of the oligarchs, Lawrence.
Pardon me?
I said this is the war of the oligarchs. Trump and the conservative oligarchs don't like Bezos, who's apparently I don't know what his politics are, but he's not a hardcore right-wing conservative, and he's not turned the Washington Post into the Wall Street Journal or not changed it the way that Rupert Murdoch changed the Wall Street Journal. You'll recall when Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal, about half of the editorial staff quit in protest, and there's been a number of people over the years that continue to quit because he's basically turned it into a propaganda instrument for the billionaire class. And yes, Bezos is one of the biggest of the billionaires, but he's apparently not as toxic as these other guys. So I think that what we're seeing here is quite literally the war of the billionaires.
And now here's my question. What I don't hear enough about it in liberal media is what we do about it. Everybody says, get politically active and vote. With gerrymander districts and the power of incumbency and the fact that you have approximately 40% of the voting population that is being led by like sheep to the slaughter by these people. I would like to hear from other listeners, as a matter of fact, as well as yourself, some solutions, some political solutions.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, first of all, in terms of a viable political takeover, I think it's entirely possible. One of the problems that we've had in the last few elections, and certainly the last election, was that I think only about 30% of people who are under 35 turned out to vote. And it might have been a little over 30%, but it was certainly below 50%. And, we need to get those numbers up. In terms of what to do once we take power, I would start at Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican but was a progressive, and say it's time to break up these, some of these big corporations, start enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. There are other great solutions too, Lawrence. Thanks for the call and thanks for putting the shout out for them. Great suggestion. Kip in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Kip, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, love the show. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you. What's up?
I would like to make a couple comments on what a gentleman spoke on at the beginning of the hour about Walmart buying up oil and selling it less than retail value. I believe that practice is called dumping, and it's illegal in the United States. I heard a show recently on BBC about this.
It's illegal for foreign countries to do dumping in the United States.
Yeah, okay.
In the United States, we refer to that as predatory pricing.
Nice. Well, also on a side note, being from Oregon, I wanted to comment on bigger businesses buying out smaller businesses, like you're saying in Hawaii. Since we have marijuana has become recreational here in this state, I feel like this is a practice that's happening currently, and it's a big shift from starting out as a medical scene and transitioning into a recreational scene. and making a large monetary substance out of this and pricing out smaller and middle class people in the economy.
Yeah. Well, this is because our economy has been rigged the way it was mostly by policies enacted by Ronald Reagan, but other Republicans since then. And there have been a few Democrats who have participated in this as well. But because our economy has been rigged to favor big corporations, it's more and more difficult. I mean, Louise and I have started 7 businesses in the 46 years we've been married. And 5 of them grew to be something of consequence, and 3 or 4 of them we sold off and did very well with. And I am very skeptical that today I could as easily start a business as I did in 1968 or 1971 or 1978 or 1983 or 1987 when we started each of those businesses.
Right.
We started a travel agency. You can't compete now with the big travel, agencies. All the local travel agencies are gone. We started 2 different advertising agencies. There might still be a niche for that, but it would be a tough one to crack. It's just I don't see where America is friendly to small businesses. Politicians love to give lip service to small business because everybody thinks, oh, small business is wonderful, Main Street and all that. But it's nonsense. What they're really interested in doing is controlling the economy from the ground up.
Right, and commenting on what you were saying earlier about banks in Hawaii, I want to say one thing that's really interesting in this scenario, it's kind of a gray area, is these dispensaries and these grows and stuff. They cannot bank with larger banks because they're federally operated, and that's federally legal.
Right.
So it's this large, strange zone in our state that doesn't really make sense yet, and it's kind of like ironing it out, waiting to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, this is why, and both Bernie and I think Jeff Merkley have both proposed that marijuana be delisted. It's all of that is because it's listed as a Schedule I substance, and that doesn't even require Congress. Although Congress could do it, they could change it, but that's something that the Trump administration or the Obama administration could have done, and any old day that they chose to. It's in the purview of, I believe, the FDA. So, Kip, thanks a lot for the call.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Maxwell in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Hey, Maxwell, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom. I can't get over how glibly these politicians talk about war. I spent 9 straight months in Fort Lewis, Washington hospital from Vietnam wounds, along with all the other 30-some people. I wish that Bolton, I wish that Trump, I wish that Cheney and all the rest of them, I wish they could suffer like we did. I'm still suffering from it. And it bothers me that they talk so casually, like we're a bunch of pawns or something. And that's really all. And another thing, too, we made a treaty with Iran. France, Germany, Britain, I think China and Russia were in on it, too. We break a treaty, what are all the other countries going to feel about that? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, no, you said it very well, Maxwell. And if we break that treaty with Iran, it will reflect more poorly on us than on Iran. And whether or not it'll blow up the Iran deal, I don't know. A lot's going to depend on Iran's response to it, and also the response of the countries that you just identified. Germany in particular, Germany and the UK in particular, although Russia has a real interest in that region. I think China is a little more hands-off in that part of the world, although they're getting very active in Africa.
So what are they going to think?
That's the $64,000 question. And so, yep.
Well,
Maxwell, thank you for the call. Do you have? By the way, are you affiliated with any of the Vietnam vet groups?
The what groups?
Vietnam veteran groups.
Oh, I was, but not now. I'm 78. I've spent the year 1968 in the hospital total, combat-related wounded. So, I'm kind of out of it now.
I'm just wondering if the vets groups are as horrified by Bolton and Trump.
Well,
as,
I think that they
as
are,
you and
Tom. I talk with a
it.
lot of them. I talk with a lot of them, and none of them in particularly agree with what's happening as far as Trump and the wars and things like that. He just doesn't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I wonder if Trump were to try to get into a war with Iran, if the generals would say no. I mean, you were in the military, I was not. What's your sense of how that might play out? They haven't said no so far to anything else.
I flew with the same missions as McCain did. Now, he spent a lot of time in Hanoi Hilton over there, and all, you know, I'm proud that he did that, but at the same time, it's almost like he's back to being a hawk, kind of a hawk again, and I can't understand it. I really can't. It's like they forget about what happened.
Yeah. Or they find that being a hawk is what gets them reelected, and so they go for it.
Yeah, right.
It's all about the power.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we'll see what happens. Maxwell, thank you for the call, and thanks for your service to your country. I'm sorry that you're still suffering from the wounds of the Vietnam War. I know the psychic wounds of it are still echoing through our country, but the physical wounds have to be tough. Maxwell, thank you very much. And we'll be back in just a minute. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Mike in Butler, Tennessee. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
I enjoy the show, Tom. I saw a replay of the drawing they had for the legislative seat in, wasn't it Virginia, some time ago? And a couple of things troubled me. They did not use a tumble cage or a glass fishbowl. They used an opaque, wide-necked urn, and they did not drop those slips into the urn. They reached in and placed them. So at that point, they well could have known which was where, and then they didn't shake the urn. He held it up, and a lady reached in and ostensibly moved those slips, but it could have been like a magician would do in a shell game. I'm suspicious that they could have known all along which slip was where, and if they could have, they would have.
Did the Republican end up with a seat?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Did the Republican end up with a seat? I'm sorry, Mike. It seems like I'm losing my voice here.
Yes, definitely did, and I don't know who the panel was, but the legislature was under Republican control at that time, so I'm assuming that the panel may have been made up of the same. I don't really know. And then the other issue is I've heard on this school strike issue the claim made that teachers should not have the right to strike, often based on two things. One is that they have, in many states, collective bargaining rights. And I can only speak to Florida, although I assume it's true in most states. The Florida collective bargaining law for public employees is a total and complete farce, and the teachers have no
It is in
standing
most red states.
In those
This is what look at what Scott Walker did in Wisconsin. With public
ultimately,
employees,
the decision can and is frequently simply imposed after going through the whole process. And all it's set up that way and was intentionally done so. And then the other argument that's often made is that public employees should not have the right to strike or do not have the right to strike. And I'm not sure that that's true in all cases. I think it may be true for what they call critical services, but I don't think
this was the rubric. This was the rule that Reagan used to fire the air traffic controllers. Yeah, Mike, I get it, and I agree, and it's a terrible thing. With regard to the vote in Virginia, though, we have a Republican Party now that has engaged in a multi-hundred-million-dollar gerrymander in state after state after state, funded in large part by right-wing billionaires. You've got a massive voter suppression effort going on all across the United States under the false notion that they have to stop voter fraud when there is no voter fraud. It is so irrelevant. It's irrelevant, and so what the Republican Party has, and then the for-profit voting machines that seem to turn out results that favor the Republicans by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points more than the exit polls. And when we look at all this, it's no surprise that somebody would think that just drawing a name out of the urn would be a corrupt practice as well. It's just a real shame. Mike, thanks for the call and thanks for pointing it all out. Patty in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Patty, thanks for listening to us on AM 1350. What's up?
Hey, Tom. The Walmarts come into towns and will shop around to find out which town will give them property tax abatements for, say, like 10 years or something, while they're using our roads and our bridges and our ports and our courts, and the police are there pretty much 2-3 times a day sometimes. They're using our military to keep their shipping lanes open for all the stuff they bring into our ports. And the state of Florida lets them keep either, if not the entire 6% sales tax, a portion of it. And they get to write a tax. They get a tax write-off for their losses when they undercut other people's prices. And we have a Walmart down the street from us that has put out a bike shop out of business, bait and tackle store, a beauty supply store. There's been 2 drug store chains, big ones, that they've put out of business because they sell food, and little dress shops, and all of that money would be people that would live in the community and be paying plumbers and babysitters and getting their hair done and stuff. At the end of the day, Walmart pushes a button and whoosh, all our money goes offshore. So,
yep.
Well,
it doesn't go offshore. It goes to Bentonville, Arkansas.
Well, yeah, but
yeah, your point is well made. And Patty, it's not just Walmart. I mean, Amazon is shopping around right now to see who will give them the biggest tax breaks and tax abatements and property tax eliminations and things. And Boeing did that. It's like every company in America. This is the game they play. Bernie suggested, and Patty, thank you for the call. Bernie suggested years ago on this program that we should pass a law saying that any state that allows this to happen by any company, that engages in this practice, loses all their federal highway funds. That would put an end to it instantly, and it could be done at a federal level. I would love to see that, but I don't think that this corrupt Republican control is going to happen. Thanks so much for being with us, and don't forget, democracy depends on you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. And thanks again to KWAI 1080 AM. I'll be back tomorrow.
Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.